Jen, can we start? Are we good?
Yep.
Recording.
Okay. So in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act, notice of this meeting has been provided by filing copy thereof. Oh wait, I guess I should start. Park Planning Board meeting of October 15th to order. In accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act, notice of this meeting has been provided by filing a copy thereof with the Home News Tribune and the Star Ledger, and by posting a copy thereof on the bulletin board of the main floor at Borough Hall. I will not remind everybody of where the fire exits are. You're going to have to be apprised of your own fire exits, but I will remind everyone to speak nice and clear and wait for speaker power. Jen, roll call, please.
Ms. Hammond?
Here.
Mr. Brusher?
Here.
Ms. Hazhazi? Mr. Hale?
Here.
Ms. Hand?
Here.
Mr. Kluger?
Here.
Mr. Linares? Mr. Millay?
Here.
Mr. Nolan?
Oh, we have Khalidra has just chimed. Why don't you call her again?
Ms. Hadhazi?
Here.
Mr. Perlman?
Here.
Mr. Williams?
Here.
All right, thank you, Jen. We got a full house here. Almost full house. So let's see. So we have no minutes from our last meeting yet. So our basic order of business is the ordinance that we did discuss when we last met has been brought to council for first reading, and they have referred it back to us. And this is the ordinance regarding using garages as accessory buildings. And it's actually called concerning accessory buildings, garages, and home occupation, and amending that part of the code in the code of the Borough of Highland Park. So everyone should have already received that ordinance and had time to review it. It is pretty short, so I don't know, Matt, if you want to say something about it, or if Jim wants to say something about it first, and then if you do, great, and then after that maybe we'll just roll into, since it is so short, just sort of actually just kind of reading it out and just going through it so we're all clear and can bring up any questions or concerns about the language. So Matt?
Sure. And Jim, if you want to chime in on anything, that's great as well. This is, I think I said last time, this was just in response to a number of folks who had heard or thought or believed that the code said that garages could only be used for garages. And when we went and looked at it, it sort of did say that. And so there was a number of folks who, given COVID and the fact that, their kitchen table is now their office, and their second grade school and a whole bunch of other places wanted to sort of do some expanding into the garage to create a home office of sorts. And we tried to craft it, I think, in a way that is fairly limited. The goal is not to have businesses, retail businesses, run out of the garages. It's more of an attempt to give people the flexibility to have office space in their garage. Is essentially, it limits the number of people who can be in there. It very clearly prevents or says what type of amenities can be in there. And it was really just an attempt to be responsive to not just COVID, I think, but also, some folks who wanted to be able to use their garages in other ways other than cars. So I think that was the intent of the resolution.
Okay, thank you. Jim, was there anything that you feel you need to kind of share about the actual language or the intention, or?
I mean, we also did some adjustments on home occupation, allowing it to occur in a garage or an accessory structure, because before you could only have a home occupation in your dwelling. In fact, actually, in a strict technical reading, Scott can verify this, the garage was actually only for the storage of cars, not for an occupation, but for people that use their garages as a glorified toy chest for little ones. That actually violates the definition the way it reads today. So,
All right.
yeah, that's it. I mean, we just sort of updated this a bit, I think, to really address what's happening out there in the borough.
So basically, this part of the code used to just say that you could use your garage as storage for an automobile, and now we've added, expanded that language, and then also kind of redefined some of it. Is that an accurate description?
Yes. Yes.
So, so I guess, so our job is basically for consistency. In other words, what is the goal of the ordinance, and then is that what it's actually saying? So there's sort of two pieces to it. One is, are we okay with what that? Someone has a little bit of background noise. I don't know who that is. Anyway,
Madam Chair, what
muted. You may mute yourself until you're speaking. Maybe.
chime in, Madam Chair, just real quick.
Yes.
A consistency review is really pursuant to the statute, section 26, and what it really does is your job is to determine whether or not the ordinance is not inconsistent with the master plan. If you make changes to the ordinance and it goes back, there may very well be a requirement to reintroduce the ordinance, which is certainly your right. But I wanted to be clear that the consistency review is whether or not it is consistent with the master plan in accordance with the statute under section 26.
So you're saying that we have no guidance over the actual content, but just whether or not it is, or whether the content is consistent with what the master plan provides or
I have
describes.
That's what the statute indicates. It is my belief, however, that if you end up making recommendations with regard to the ordinance, you can certainly do that. And if the town council decides to accept those, depending upon the nature of those, they may have to reintroduce this ordinance, because if they are substantive, they will require a reintroduction, because you cannot go to second reading on an ordinance with a change from what was originally introduced. So your charge is what I said before. If you choose to make changes, if they are ministerial, we use that term, or grammatical or things of that nature, then it wouldn't cause the need for a reintroduction. If they are substantive, in all likelihood, it would be determined by your borough attorney that they would have to reintroduce. I just wanted to put the parameters of what your charge is and what you can and can't do.
But in terms of the consistency, we are determining that the content, that what it is saying, our master plan provides for. But
Yes.
but there's sort of a more nuanced piece, which is it, that there's what we believe it's saying, and then what the actual language is or isn't including, right? Like how it's actually said, that there's an understanding.
No, that is not your charge, but you can comment on that. As I said, the statute is clear. You are dealing with the consistency issue, and the statute actually says whether your determination is whether or not whether the ordinance is not inconsistent with the master plan. That's what the ordinance says. Planning boards at times will then add to that charge and indicate that they feel that the language needs to be tinkered with, and you have that right. And then the governing body, in this case the town council, can either accept those suggestions, or if they decide to change it, then they might have to reintroduce it. I'm just trying to make it clear what the process is.
Thank you. So then, Matt, maybe another important note at this point would be for you to sort of maybe tell us a little bit about how this was discussed at council, and what the goal is of the ordinance then, so that, you know what I'm saying? Like, Just give us some background on, you know, how the council received the ordinance then.
Right. So how the council received, well, so the council received a number of inquiries from residents saying, we would like to do this with the garage, or we would like to do something with the garage. Is that possible? Is that, you know, is that something that we can do? I believe Scott had a couple inquiries as well from people wanting to put, you know, various changes to their garage. And so we looked at that, and when we discovered that the current code really does sort of limit things to cars. I mean, it's a very restrictive set of rules that are obviously not being followed by many people whose cars are are someplace else, and their toys are in the garage. But that being said, you know, we've heard, I mean, I think everybody has experienced and heard stories, you know, during COVID that of a need for additional space. I mean, if you see the number of basements, or the number of attics, or the number of carve outs for offices that people have wanted to do. But I do want to point out that we did sort of believe or recognize and that when COVID goes away, this is not, that need for additional home office space or additional space probably is not going to go away completely either. Many people aren't going back to work even after COVID. And so, you know, we wanted to allow people to use as much of their space as they could for both work and for home. And you know, it does also say for recreational activities. So, you know, gyms and things like that, I think are, that was in there before, but it was written sort of like you could put tennis courts back there, but you couldn't put a home gym. And so we sort of cleaned up that language as well. And so the real intent is, I think, just to allow, you know, some more flexibility for people who don't have the space in their house and have a space in a garage and would like to be able to use that space, you know, for that. I think that the idea that we were thinking about was, you know, for people who are doing tutoring of a variety of different kinds, people who are, you know, who are lawyers, who are, you know, sort of that was the vision. But, you know.
Right. So, and that's what we discussed, I think, and kind of shaped up some of this
Right.
at our last meeting. I think I maybe wasn't clear with my question, which was, upon first reading at council, was this very well received in terms of that they felt that this was an ordinance that checked those boxes that you just described, and that were there any outlying concerns about it?
So no, just to let you know, this went through the Economic Development Commission. It actually also went through the Public Safety Commission, just to make sure it was consistent with fire issues. And so given that it went through both of those committees with a you know, strong thumbs up, and the vote, I believe, was unanimous, that we did believe. And again, you know, the consulting with the professional staff as well, that this was an ordinance that captured those things.
Okay, great, thanks.
I'm sorry, a resolution that captured those things. Yeah.
All right, so at this point, I think instead of maybe going through, there's really only the A, B, C, D, E that we would maybe perhaps go through, but if anyone, maybe a more direct way would just be if anyone has any questions or comments or, you know, about either the language. Yes, Khalidra.
I have a question about the language of the heating and air conditioning, and just wondering if it needs to be a little bit more specific in terms of allowing people to have heating and air conditioning. What does that mean? Is it like space heaters, or if they were to get like mini splits installed, what would be the type of heating and air conditioning that would be allowed? Like if someone were to put central air conditioning versus an AC window unit, what's allowed, what's not allowed, what would trigger a property tax increase in terms of the structure and the way it's outfitted, if there's any safety measures that people need to be aware of if they decide to use space heaters to heat the space. Is there something that the borough wants to put out to say, like, sort of safe practices with using space heaters in an enclosed space like a garage, especially in a place where people store flammable things that they use to work on in their house, like just a way for people to stay safe. I don't know if that would be something that would be included in this ordinance or something separate that would just be a notice to residents.
The space heater, I think that would be an important notice. I can defer to Scott and Jim in some respects on whether it would be a part of this, but I would certainly think that might be as part of the introduction of this to the public, that there could be something, explaining some of the issues around space heaters. So
it's optional. Basically, it may have a sink, electrical service, heat and/or air conditioning, so it's optional. And then that requires a permit, electrical or plumbing.
Well, I think she's talking about the safety aspect. So I guess once this auxiliary, separate building, if it were to be formalized and used as the way you're describing it, whatever other code applies to safety, and in other words, grounded outlets and, whatever other level of aspects are in the code would apply to this as well. Is that sort of like a blanket, right, kind of approach that, but I think you bring up an interesting point. I mean, and this is something that we really probably, it's not necessarily within our purview, but that we're saying that you can use your garage to extend your living space and however you normally use your home. But garages sort of are, they're not drywalled and insulated and, and sort of built the way a house would be built. So it's like, are we sort of encouraging people to just spread out into their garage and that we're allowing for that, but not necessarily building in a lot of the controls that you would if, like within a home. Now, I don't know that a home necessarily has to have heat or AC, or that people put space heaters of all kinds within their homes. I'm just saying it's an interesting line, right? We have certain rules that we use for construction code and for whatever COs that you would use inside a house, and now that we're sort of including the garage as part of the house. Therefore, I imagine all of those same aspects of the code would apply, but we're going to have this hybrid where people are just sort of maybe squatting in not completely finished spaces. I don't know that that's part of our consideration here.
I would agree, but I would think that, just to answer the question that you raised, Kim, and I'll defer to Scott and Bruce, but it would seem to me very clear that if there's going to be some of the options that Jim just talked about, namely a sink, electrical service, heat or air conditioning, those type of things, sounds to me like they are all subject to permits, and they would have to go to the building department to get permits, whether it's in the house or in the garage. So if there's going to be something a bit more elaborate that people want to engage in on a year-round basis, they're going to have to get the permits. That this ordinance doesn't negate that requirement. It actually is overlaid on that requirement.
Right. So I think what I'm saying is you just said it so much better. That's the more clear part, is when someone is going to formalize that space, obviously they're going to have to then follow the code. I'm just wondering whether we're opening ourselves up to sort of the piece of, people using whatever. I don't think it's within the purview of this code. I'm just wondering whether it's sort of going to be an unintended byproduct where you have people not really finishing off spaces, but starting to use them a lot more, or not finish them off, you know, in a, by getting permits and doing it the right way, and then having some sort of, you know, space heater,
Yeah,
not insulated, whatever, you know, some weird stuff going on.
But on the other hand, by making it, you know, legal, it also may allow or encourage people to make it more regulated, and so they might have better spaces. Right now, you can go into your garage and do whatever and have your gas
Yeah,
can
right.
there and your
Right.
whatever. So it might actually be beneficial
Right. Encourage
to,
people.
in a sense,
Yeah.
to just formalize what people are doing anyway. So
Right. And it
the
is
fact that
right,
people are asking is good.
right. I agree. I mean, the idea is to formalize it. Right. Okay.
All right, I have a few questions. Are we on to
Yeah, sure.
the next? Apologies to Roger if I'm beyond master plan consistency. You know, I wouldn't not follow the rules, but unless I'm maybe not reading it right, or maybe other rules that will come into play, I think the way it's written, I could have a retail business in my garage based on these changes, as long as I don't have a sign, as long as I just run it myself along with my wife or my child. There's only two of us. So I think if you just read it the way it is, I could sell items out of my garage. Now, maybe that's okay, but you know, maybe I don't know if that, I don't think that was the intent of what we were doing.
I would just say, I mean, a retail business would most likely need or want a place for people to park out front, a place for people to stay. And I think that there's some other parking issues that would sort of negate some of that. I mean, I don't know that it doesn't specifically say no retail businesses, but I think that there are other, as we said before, sort of other places where it would be difficult to have a retail business in a place like that.
Well, you're saying it wouldn't be desirable, but what Alan is saying is, does the language provide for it? And I would go back to kind of what I just said about the other issue, which is if you're not allowed to have a retail business run out of your home because you're not zoned for commercial, wouldn't that apply to the garage as well? But
don't we also regulate
yes, Rebecca.
for people running businesses for permits and licenses? So if you do have like shelving and are like, come look at all these beautiful antiques or things I've made in my garage, aren't you running afoul of those other regulations? And I think that would overlap.
I would just wonder whether we just need something to say subject to these other rules, because otherwise someone could say, that's my home occupation. It's carried out for gain. I don't have any signage. Only two of us run it. And therefore, based on this, I should be able to do it.
Maybe Roger can advise if they run concurrently or if it would be overruled.
But I think Jim's
got some.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I think the
hold
most,
on, everyone's talking at once. I'm going to give Roger the floor for a second, because
hand the time over to Mr. Constantine.
okay,
got
great.
it. Okay, so the way home occupation reads today, and I suspect has read for decades and decades, maybe forever in your code, is an activity carried out for gain by a resident conducted as an accessory use in the resident's dwelling. So, Alan, all the things that you were describing can occur today perfectly legally. And I would suspect that in many communities, you do have people that are operating online retail from their homes. And when I look at the master plan, you know, because we're talking about master plan consistency, you know, one of our land use goals is, the first one, embrace the old and new. So we're trying to preserve the borough's unique inherent qualities, evolving to meet current conditions and emerging trends. And to me, this fine-tuning of this ordinance is meeting current conditions and emerging trends. And in fact, probably post-COVID, I think we will see even more people operating whatever business.
Oh, I'm not, that's fine. I'm not talking about doing things online. I'm talking about having inventory in my garage and selling things that were out of my basement, which I'm sure is already happening. And I'm not saying I have a problem with it. I'm saying is by writing this, it may sort of embolden people to say, hey, I guess I can do it. And that's fine, as long as everyone maybe just realizes, unless other rules will come into play that will stop that from happening. I also don't want to make it too common for that to happen, to have a negative impact on the downtown and downtown businesses, for someone to say, why should I bother opening up a store in the downtown when I can just do it out of my garage now and do it through word of mouth or, social media, online, etc. and sell tangible, property.
Here is, based on my review of a lot of ordinances that deal with home occupation, tend to be somewhat contentious. But you say retail, could an individual right now and pursuant to this ordinance operate an online business? I think they could. When you talk about the idea of a retail business where you're having product stored in the house, stored in the attic, stored in the, recognize that it says in the ordinance that it is an accessory use. If it becomes such that it is beyond an accessory use, not now. I admit that the language does not indicate that, for example, only. Actually, it doesn't really have to say that, because you end up saying that it's an accessory use and it's only in the garage. And if the garage is utilized for that purpose, I think the answer is yes, it could be. But if it suddenly ends up you're selling your widgets and you now put the widgets in the basement and in the dining room, I think you now turned it into something other than accessory use in the garage, and that would be a violation.
Okay, as long as.
Yeah, and if you go back to the definition of accessory building or use, it clarifies it. Subordinate accessory use is subordinate to and serves an ancillary purpose to a principal building or use. So that one, I think, covers the magnitude and intensity. Number two is subordinate in area, extent, or purpose to the principal building or principal use served. There's another check. So if somebody has their online business and they're storing in their entire basement and now the garage and rooms of their house, if it were to become an issue, there were too many deliveries occurring, neighbors call, we found out about the extent of it. Not that we look for these problems, but usually the neighbors ring a bell if they reach a certain intensity. I think you have some aspects there to basically claim it's no longer an accessory use, because C, the third part of accessory use, contributes to the comfort, convenience, or necessity of occupants of the principal building's principal use served. So, there are, I think, and there's a lot of case law that Roger could probably go on to about accessory uses that, so at some point, somebody outgrows their house, they just need to be told to move and get a legitimate commercial space. Those are tough things to define, but there are qualifiers under the accessory building or use definition that have always been there.
Alan, did you have any other questions?
You're muted, Alan.
Noise on my end. So along my sort of worst case scenario, hypotheticals, if we're allowing academic, musical, religious instruction, tutoring, coaching sessions, I assume that, our intention is more for one-on-one, one-on-two, something like that. But is it broad enough for someone to then say, okay, I'm going to have school inside my garage? I know people have talked about doing educational pods as opposed to sending their kids back into school. If that's what was intended and we're okay with that, then fine. But just that if our intention was only one-on-one or one-on-two or up to 3 or up to a certain number, as opposed to having 10 or 15 kids inside a garage, not 15, but having a number of kids being taught inside a garage. Do we think that that's a little broad, or we think we're okay the way it is?
I have a question. So, I'm maybe bouncing off of that. I'm just want to get some
Well,
clarity about the ordinance.
Wait, one second though. Are you answering Alan's question? Like, is it to
It's
speak
maybe
to what he
it's
just
similar
brought
lines.
up?
It's a similar line. I don't know
Okay.
if maybe I don't know, maybe let someone answer Alan's question. All right, and then maybe my question will be answered. So again,
I'm also, there's some background noise someplace. I'm not sure where it's coming from, but I just hear, it's tough to hear.
Maybe if you're not speaking, just put yourself on mute.
Okay.
why
No, it's very quiet.
Yeah.
I think that to respond to Alan's question, and I'll again defer to Jim, but and again, I'm now becoming familiar, as we all are, with these educational pods. It is my understanding that they tend to be, I don't know that they're 15, but they tend to be 4 or 5 or 6, something along that line. Could that be an accessory or a home occupation under this ordinance? In the garage, I think it could. Now, the question becomes, does it then, if you have 4 or 5 kids with the parents dropping off, my kid is one of them, and we have 3 others, is it disruptive to the section C of the principal structure if you have 3 parents dropping off their kids? Probably not. If Alan's situation was that you have, I don't get the sense that in Highland Park you have garages that are 3,500, 4,000 square feet. So therefore it's unlikely that you're going to get 15 or 20 kids, especially during the COVID period, that's for sure. But subsequently, I guess you could jam them in. That may create a problem in terms of the number of people that are dropping off their kids, because now you've got mom or dad dropping the kid off in the morning and picking the kid up in the afternoon, or however it works. So that might become an issue in the neighborhood that might be beyond an accessory use. That pod may be too big.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the ordinance. So all the things all the hypotheticals are realities, things that might be already happening. Home office occupation, online sales of online retail sales, podding, all of those things are currently permitted. If we're not talking about the garage, no one has a garage right now. Home occupation is permitted. All the things we're talking about are currently permitted in the main dwelling. This ordinance simply says you can take your garage, and the things you can do in the main house, you can do in the garage too. That's really all this ordinance is trying to do? Because I feel like we're overthinking this. I really think we're overthinking. I mean, I think all these potential things that could happen, if they're going to happen, they're happening, right? Because people do in the main dwelling or they're expanding their dwelling. It's just that we're just taking the garage and saying what you do in the main dwelling, you can also do in the garage. Am I right about that, Jim?
You're right, and we had some discussion, and I don't know, Matt, if it was during one of our we talked about whether we try to limit on the number of students. I'm just going to provide a point of reference that I think might be refreshing. The state of New Jersey, the municipal land use law was amended, Roger would know, was it 25 years ago, for home daycare. It allows any resident of any single family home in the state of New Jersey, regardless of what municipality, what zone you're in, to have up to 5 children, not your own, attend a home daycare in your house, plus your own children. That can happen next door to anyone, anywhere, tomorrow. Roger, it's a statutory provision that's permitted anywhere. The reality is it doesn't happen everywhere. I actually had one down the street from me that was exactly that, 5 outside children. Perfectly fine neighbor, fits in residential neighborhood, low impact. So that can happen today, home daycare, anywhere.
I have a question about that with regards to the educational pods, because with a lot of the educational pods, some parents are opting to hire a teacher So does that count as an employee working out of the garage, as opposed to where the ordinance says it can only be up to 2 people that occupy the house?
The answer is yes. That would violate the standard. That would be an outside employee, and the ordinance clearly states that no outside employees are authorized in the home occupation.
Wait, come again?
So it says that an outside employee cannot work within the space. And so Kalidra's idea is that if you hire a professional teacher to run your pod, that would be an employee working in the space, which was not what this intended. It was if you are teaching your kid yourself, or your spouse is teaching your kid yourself, or, that's okay, but it's the employee. And that was an attempt, I think, to sort of put some boundaries around what can happen in the garage and not have it be, the full retail outlet. So.
And it's clearly in the ordinance. If you look at the section involving home occupation, it makes it very clear the home occupation is limited to 2 residents who reside in the premises and no employee. So therefore, the hired teacher is an employee, would not be permitted.
But I can hire a babysitter though, and the babysitter can hang out with my kids and a neighbor's kid in the converted garage.
But that's not a business. That's a different situation.
That's not your business.
It's an employee. I'm paying someone to come in.
It's not a home occupation.
No, that's
Right, it's not a home occupation. No.
I think that any reasonable interpretation of an ordinance would consider that to be something that is subordinate and ancillary to a residential use, because they have been for.
So would a teacher fall under that same definition? Because my home occupation is not a teacher. I'm not a teacher, and my husband's not a teacher, and we don't have we don't have an educational pod. But if we did, would the teacher be classified? I mean, not saying that teachers are babysitters, but would the teacher fit the definition, hire a babysitter to watch your kids?
The answer is that's a stretch. I think that would be a hard stretch for a municipal court judge to buy, because it would be going to a municipal court judge. And again, I don't know what a Board of Adjustment may say in terms of an interpretation of that issue pursuant to the ordinance. And that's where it would go. It would go to the Board of Adjustment. My candid opinion is that there's a vast difference between somebody who hires a babysitter for a night out. That's not a home occupation. That is simply hiring a babysitter for a night out. This deals with home occupations. And if you're having a pod where it's just, it's involving your kids and a group of other kids, then I think that violates the ordinance. Now, conversely, I will tell you that in my opinion, if you decide if you have 3 or 4 kids, you decide to homeschool them and you bring in a teacher for your kids, I think that's a different situation. But when you start to bring in kids from outside your family, that becomes part of a home occupation. And that's where the teacher becomes an employee.
I have a dumb question. Just going back to one of the examples given. So let's say you had a child care provider who had in Highland Park had 8 kids instead of the 5 kids. Who enforces? Who would care? Like who enforces that they are breaking that statute?
Quite frankly, in most municipalities, it's the neighbors.
But who would right? So neighbor complaints. Who enforces it? Who comes in and how is that addressed? I guess is my question.
The zoning officer comes in and files a violation.
A zoning officer, and so it really be a zoning officer for all these sort of little discrepancies that we're unclear about. Is that okay?
Correct.
Yeah. I actually think that looking at the language, it would not apply to a group of families bringing an outside teacher in to teach in the pod, because the start of the definition is any activity carried out for gain by a resident. I'm not carrying out this pod for gain. I'm carrying it to educate my students, my children, and maybe someone else's children, and which is different than if I'm a teacher bringing in outside students for me to make money on. I'm not, so I don't know that the example, Khadija, that you gave, which I don't think was the intention, was to eliminate the use of pods, actually applies here.
Got an argument. I don't disagree. There's at least an argument, but I think that the question becomes, when you start homeschooling kids and you then end up having the pods, is that an activity for gain? I can make an argument on the other side that says it is an activity for gain because you are saving, the cost of a private school, for example.
Yeah, but Alan, I'm sorry, Roger, I actually agree with Alan because I think, again, I go back to the accessory use criteria, and is the magnitude of what you're doing subordinate to and ancillary to the principal use? That is, is it secondary in area, extent, purpose to the residential use? So I think if you were doing a learning pod with 5 children inside a studio apartment or a 1-bedroom apartment, that may begin to push the envelope because you're no longer able to do it in a way where its area, extent, and purpose is subordinate. The area may be the entire, more than half the apartment. So I think there's some qualifiers to that. But if you're on a 15,000 square foot lot on the north side with a 5,000 square foot house, is it, are we saying in today's environment right now that learning pods are really an accessory to residential use for probably thousands of people across America, probably hundreds of thousands?
And that's what makes arguments work.
Yeah, and so, zoning and its interpretation does change over time, and depending on cultural norms and circumstances. So that's where I sort of go back to. I've been a zoning officer, by the way, and whoever said that the neighbors, I think it was you, Roger, I think that's the first flag. I wouldn't worry about every possible permutation of every worst person, worst actor doing the worst possible things. Chances are the neighbors will ring the bell, will hear about it, and most people will be able to operate within this without any problem. My guess is there's a whole lot of businesses don't know about.
But I think the point is when the neighbors raise the flag,
What guidance do we
does the use, where does it fall in terms of what our intention was, right? That's what this exercise is about, is that just making sure that whichever way it falls, that you're backed by the intention of this ordinance. And I think we kind of are getting into the weeds with the specifics of, what could be. I think part of the reason why this board tends to do that is we have seen things that we thought were pretty simple really get perversed by, sort of the worst case scenarios. So it doesn't hurt to kind of walk through some of the, what ifs.
I think
I have a simple question. Can this I guess maybe Jim, so this could just be used as a bedroom. Like I have a 4-bedroom house and I have 5 kids and I'm gonna put 2 kids out in my, finished garage every night as a bedroom. Is that is that permitted?
As a bedroom in the garage?
Yeah, it's an auxiliary use. I didn't have enough bedrooms in my house and I'm gonna put a bedroom out there.
Matt, do you want to comment? I know we took out the sleeping.
Well, I'm saying, so the way it's written, does it allow for that or not?
So we did not intend. The intent was not to create a new apartment out there. The intent was not to allow. And so
my kids, college. I'm just gonna, stick them out there to sleep.
Right, but in the restrictions and about what we had in there originally, at one point we had that you could have sleeping arrangements, right? And we took that out. Did I get that right, Jim? We had that based on our last conversation. My memory is that when we brought this up to the planning board last time, there was a question about whether sleeping should be in there, and we decided that it was better to have that out, to take that out. So
We took it out, but we also don't allow a bathroom, toilet, kitchen, or cooking device. So
right.
So if someone were to sleep out there, we don't have a problem with that.
you're gonna know
I don't-
about it.
You're saying it's not in
I-
there, but you're not not allowing it.
I don't think that we're not allowing it, right?
I have a question. Just so this ordinance change, proposed ordinance change deals with what's captured under accessory uses for the garage, right? What are the kinds of accessory uses permitted in the garage? Does the ordinance say anything about I don't want a garage anymore? Maybe I bought a home with an attached garage. You know what? I don't want a garage anymore, and I just want to take the garage and absorb it into my home and knock down some walls and just expand the living space entirely. This ordinance doesn't deal with that issue at all. There's
No.
another step of the ordinance that permits or does not permit that, right? And does it permit that? I mean, because it's totally separate. issue.
That would be depending on whether the garage meets the setback requirements
Okay.
of the principal structure, because now you're absorbing it into the principal structure. And garages absorbed into principal structures happens all the time. Drive through South Edison, you'll see a lot of expanded family rooms, extra bedrooms.
So the answer is yes. We could.
Yeah,
It
happens
might be
all
able
the
to do that, but then it would not. But then the whole issue of what's accessory is gone, and this ordinance is not.
That's
Not
right.
applicable.
Because then you're right, Jeff, because then it becomes part of the principal structure.
Yeah.
It's no longer an accessory structure,
Right.
assuming it meets all the other bulk standards, whatever they may be.
Yeah.
Full disclosure: I used to be a zoning officer too, Jim. So I know.
You know that,
Parsing the hairs is something I spent
yeah.
years trying to figure out.
but I also.
Okay, so back to my bedroom question. Where's the zoning officer gonna fall if my neighbors call, if I have someone sleeping out in my garage, maybe not every night, but let's say 8 nights a month or something,
I think if it's your
based on the ordinance as written.
if it's again, I'll voice an opinion based upon what I see in the ordinance. If it's your son coming back from college and you have a bedroom there, I think that's an accessory use that would be permitted. If you suddenly want to turn it into a Airbnb,
No, I'm just saying, I'm really just more trying to get at the heart of, is it okay for people to use it as a bedroom?
Yeah,
I would say yes, but I would say we would have some issues if it was an Airbnb.
I agree.
And the other important
right.
thing to do is to not let every teenager at the high school know that it's permissible to sleep in the garage. There'll be a rush. There'll be a rush on the garage bedrooms.
Okay, does anyone have any other questions at this time?
Not so much a question as I do think that we should figure out something. I don't know if it's the planning board's responsibility to do this or if the borough council would do it, but there should certainly be something about best practices with heating space heaters in a garage. Because that just seems like a recipe for disaster for some people who don't know the safe practices for using a space heater, and especially if people are converting garages that they typically use to store tools and other materials, and you're introducing electrical heaters, because people are going to want to use these garages as extra space during cold winter months.
Again, I think your point is extraordinarily well taken, but I think if you start to use it for other than the storage of a car or tools or things of that nature, you start to use it for your own living space, I think it then becomes subject to the building codes that would then require permits. Now, the next question is, well, who enforces that? Unfortunately, it's the same question. If somebody sneaks a space heater in, if there's already electric in the garage, which may or may not be appropriately safe, is that something that can be easily enforced? Maybe, maybe not. That's a different issue. But you have that problem right now, unfortunately.
But I do agree that there could be a public safety campaign of some sort talking about space heaters that would be independent of this particular ordinance. But I think that's something that the borough ought to undertake, saying, as a matter of just good practice, saying here's proper use of space heaters.
Mm-hmm.
So Scott, this is a question for you, and I think you've said this maybe at our last meeting or just some prior time. Something like, even in your home, like there's no requirement that you have heat or that you have electricity, right? Is that kind of like true? In other words, for any living inhabited structure, is there a baseline in terms of electric, water, heat, that kind of thing?
Really, the baseline is running water. There's nothing that says you have to have heat in there. But it is different for rental units. I mean, if you're renting it out, you have to provide them heat. So it kind of intertwines together.
All right. I was only asking in terms of, as we were saying, it's an auxiliary. So whatever would be required for a functioning home would extend, therefore, to that.
Yeah, I mean,
so
I think when this goes into effect, like it was said earlier, I think a lot of people are going to do the right thing.
Yeah,
they're going to say
they want nice space, right?
Yeah, they're going to call our office and say, what do we need to do this? And then we'll walk them through the permit process of what they're going to need, what they'll have to provide. You are going to get a handful of people like you do to this day that are just going to do what they're going to want to do. But I think you're going to get a lot more people interested in doing it right.
And I know you've read this and looked this over, so I will assume that you saw no flags or concerns about what you think this kicks the door open to that we're not wanting to, and that through some basic language or whatever would prevent.
No, it looks okay. I talked to Mike Mullen about it this morning. He likes the way it's worded too, so we really don't have an issue in our department.
Okay, great. All right. Are there any other? Alan, you have a question?
Yeah. Under accessory buildings or use, item D, it says, if I read it, on the zoning lot. During the master plan, we saw there were a number of homes that had a double lot, and an accessory building might be on one lot, and it would seem possibly better phrased as a property.
That's the language that's always been there. That's there.
You're saying instead of lot, is that what you mean?
Well, zoning lot is presumably one lot on the tax map.
Oh.
And we've had a number of applications where you had a home which had two lots.
They're still, but they were still combined, like on their survey as I mean, I know what you're saying, property, but it's still like the zoning lot. It's just that there was two zoning lots,
right? Two
numbered, but one zoning lot.
My interpretation of this existing provision was that in the event that it was a multiple lot property that cross zones, this is basically saying the accessory use needs to be in the same zone
on
as
the same
principal
lot.
Use. It may not be worded in the clearest manner, but that was my interpretation, the same zoning lot.
Let the meeting reflect that Steve Nolan has joined us.
With great apology.
No problem. So what you're saying is counter to what Alan is suggesting, that the garage would have to be in the same actual lot. Okay.
Same zoning district.
Zoning.
What that's, for instance, what that's doing, I'll just give you an example. If there was an accessory use related to a commercial business that's in one of the business zones, that they had a double lot all the way through back to like Denison Street, for instance, it does not allow you to take an accessory storage related to the commercial use and let it gravitate over into the residential district.
So you're talking residential zone, like the RA zone?
Right. When this says zoning lot, my interpretation of it means the same lot in the same zone. So regardless of the assemblage of the property, whatever you're doing as accessory needs to be on the same lot within the same zone. And the properties are considered merged if they're under single ownership. So
That to me is the big point, because there's a lot of case law that indicates if you have, if I own 2 lots and I have my house on one lot and my garage on the other lot, that's an accessory structure without a principal structure, and most ordinances prohibit that. And therefore, I agree with Jim that in fact, if I own lot 1 and lot 2, in all likelihood, under the Lochner versus Campoli case, that would merge. Those lots would merge. So there'd no longer be 2 lots, there'd be 1.
right.
So speaking of worst case scenarios, it occurs to me looking at this that, when we have builders come before the board and ask for permission to build new residences, one of the things we encourage is the building of freestanding garages in the backyard, in the back of the property. And we hold them to the RSI standards for parking and making sure there's enough off-street parking for the size of the building. And I look at this and go, well, gee, if I was a builder and I wanted to build something attractive that really didn't need garage spaces, but I knew I had to have it, I could go to the board, get my plans with a garage, get my approval, and then the next day convert my garage space to accessory use to get around the RSI standards. I'm not sure I'm not sure if there's anything to do about it tonight or with this ordinance, but worst case scenarios started running around in my head about things like that.
Well, you'd still have to comply with the RSIS parking.
Well, right. You would have it because you built your accessory garage, you got your permits, you built the house, got your final CO, and then went, okay, now we're going to convert it for a home occupation office.
But I think what Jim's saying is then when you applied for the permits to convert that garage, that you still have to show that you're meeting the standard.
Yes.
Are all the current people?
So, but what
would
I'm
do
curious, which current people? I'm sorry.
So if you have a house that's been around for 100 years and it has a 2-car garage, and you come up and say, well, now I want to convert my garage, are you still required to comply with the RSI standards?
The answer I would say is yes. I'll defer, but I would think the answer is yes. If whether you have a new situation or an old situation, if you have a garage and there's a requirement for it's a small lot, you have a requirement for 2 parking spaces, whatever. Let's just say it's 2 parking spaces, and you have a very your front yard happens to be built very close to the street, so you only have a driveway that would accommodate 1 car, and then the second car would be in the garage. If you then converted your garage into something else, you may have a variance problem, or because you no longer meet the parking requirement of the zone.
I think that's going to be a standard that's going to surprise people when they come and apply.
Except I have to say on a practical level that these freestanding garages are at the back corner.
And you're right.
A lot where you wouldn't have a driveway leading up to it that would accommodate those 2 spots. So I get what you're saying. Are you worried about more than just the parking though? It sounded like there was something else that you
No, I'm just thinking
toying
the
around
worst
with.
case scenarios, like how could someone abuse this to get around the standards? It's like, well, there might
I'm
be.
sorry, I'm a little confused. When people are using their garages for this ancillary space, do they now have to apply for a permit to convert it? Because in our last meeting, I thought that it was said that you can put up drywall in your garage without a permit.
I think Scott did say that. Right, it would be, I guess it would depend on to the level that you are converting it. In other words, if you're adding electric, windows, whatever, right? Because I think you did say that, right, Scott? That
Yeah.
why don't you maybe refresh our memory on that?
Yeah, I mean, you don't need a permit to do that, but like I said earlier, I think majority of the people are going to do things the right way. you know, and do the permits and the installation and the rewiring and all that other stuff. I think you're going to have a very small amount of people that are just going to, you know, slap it up and start using it, you know, and then, I mean, you're going to have that whether you have this ordinance or not.
Okay. I think we've brought up some good issues that that we've, you know, thought we are now all well aware there are some gray areas, and of course we know there will be some perhaps bad players. Are there any other specific questions? Or I guess I should say, as Roger started us with, are there concerns about it not being consistent with the goals of the master plan? Foremost.
I have a few, I guess, comments, and I apologize in advance if you guys have already talked about this stuff in some way. One was where we talk about the different conditions for accessory use. Section E talks about allowing sink, electrical service, heat, and air conditioning, but not bathroom, toilet, kitchen, or cooking device. I'm a little concerned, and I get it in terms of the idea of having a sink, but I'm a little concerned that sink means running pipes. It means running sewer. And once there are pipes and sewer, it gets awfully easy just to throw, well, I'll just throw a shower in. I'll just throw a toilet in as well. Heck, why not just have a kitchen? It gets a lot easier to do that. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. But what I am saying is we need to think carefully about intensifying the use on an infrastructure that probably already is pretty heavily taxed. Maybe it's not a big concern, but I do have that concern, and I think that sink is in the category of shower tub, bathroom, toilet, and those things. So that was one reaction that I had, and I see that as different than heat, electric, air conditioning, that sort of thing. And then the other comment I had was where we talked about home occupation. There's a reference to activities carried out for gain. Is it necessarily for gain? I mean, could it be for pleasure or gain? I mean, if you do it on a volunteer basis, it doesn't really matter in my mind. But I do think there should be some reference to the use being consistent with that of a single family residential zone or whatever the zone is. You know, that we don't create a situation where it's noisy or bothersome to people. So those were kind of my reactions, and probably you guys already talked about all this stuff, but those were my thoughts. And I admit probably people are doing this stuff anyway. And the idea that garages are just for keeping cars in, there's probably not 10 garages in Highland Park that are used just for cars. I mean, that's not something people use garages for anymore.
So just quickly on the sinks part, I mean, we talked a little bit about this, but not really specifically in the way in which you just brought up. But I would say that you're right. The sink might be a slippery slope to something else, but the something else is specifically not allowed. So if it did pose a problem, and that's what we did spend a lot of time talking about as well, if there is a red flag, if there isn't, neighbors complaining, if there is an issue of, hey, is this or is this not in compliance?
Yeah.
That then the ordinance does speak to that what is and is not allowed. And of course you could have a shower, and if it's really because you're still an artist and you're a sculptor and you make a big mess and you wanted to have a shower, but you're not actually using the space as a, Airbnb, one might be more acceptable to a neighbor than another. So that's just my personal sort of, response. We didn't really talk a lot about that.
Yeah. I mean, my thought is just that once the infrastructure is in place, though, it becomes very, very easy to just do whatever you want. And
well, it becomes easy to have it, but if it's not permitted, you potentially.
But who would know? In other words, you.
Well, but is your concern that you would have a toilet in there and then you could now rent this out as a guest room?
So I see it as incremental. In other words, somebody would set it up via this structure that we have, and they have a sink. And then they say, I do pottery. It would be great to have a shower. And so they put a shower and maybe a toilet in. And then they let somebody from the family live there for a while, and nobody really notices. And I do think that there's an incremental difference, and that you're right.
But my point is, once that person's living there with a shower and a toilet,
Yeah.
we have that. You have the zoning officer has the right to shut that down because it's not permitted use.
And I think my concern is that the zoning duties, and that his ability to know about this stuff is going to be counting on neighbors, calling on neighbors and saying, that's not right, they shouldn't have a shower in there or whatever. I just think it's very unlikely that the place to stop it, if we decide it's not something that is appropriate, is to not let the infrastructure go back there in the first place, because that would require a permit. It does require a lot of digging. And I think that that's the place where you would force the decision. I just think it becomes so much easier to drift into residential use of a garage. And again, I don't think that's before us, but I think that's an entirely different conversation in terms of doubling the density of lots. And
So
some
do
of
you
the-
have a suggestion for what you think is a reasonable alteration to the concept or to that language, or
Well-
to that permission that you think is?
Yeah, I would remove the word a sink, and I would say, but does not contain a sink, bathroom, shower, tub, toilet, kitchen, or cooking device. I would take out anything that requires water or sewer. Unless we're making the decision that we're okay with going down that road. But I just think once you put that pipe and that sewer back there, it gets very, very easy to slip into something else. And, maybe we should have that conversation about whether we want that. I don't think it makes sense in all neighborhoods. I'm speaking from living in a place where lots are 50 by 100, that's pretty tight. And if you were to start doubling the number of families living in those zones, it changes the character of the neighborhood.
But Steve, I would respond to you by saying that we did have a conversation about, and I think Kim brought it up, about what about your son or daughter who is now, either in high school or in college and ends up being put into the bedroom on the second floor, on the, I guess the second floor or whatever you call it, of the garage.
Bite your tongue. He's not coming back.
And I think the answer is yes, it does. So, and that doesn't double the density. It just simply means that a kid goes there instead of in the bedroom in the house. If you start to get into the issue of doubling the density, then you're talking about rental apartments or Airbnbs, which are clearly not permitted under this ordinance. So
right.
I know what you're saying. It becomes, if you put in a sink, it's a slippery slope down the road.
Yeah. I see the distinction.
I would just take a small doubling the density. I don't think there's anything in this that would lead directly to doubling the density. I think that the what Roger just said is much more of a likely thing. I don't think that road is where we're headed. So
yeah, no.
Can I ask
Sorry,
can I ask a technical question? Would there be a pipe limitation for the waistline if you're only putting in a sink, which would preclude the use of a toilet later? Meaning that you would only use, let's say, a 2-inch line to run it to the house, or is that a feasible, kind of zoning or code limitation? I don't know. But
I would refer to
It's a good
Scott,
question.
building department.
Scott, could you tell us how much it would cost if somebody wanted to run sanitary and water to their
Well,
garage?
that's not my question. I'm saying, can you limit, because it's a sink, the size of the drain line going to the house and connecting to the main service?
Right, but I might have a simpler solution along Steve's line. I just wanted to see if, Scott, you had a...
Well, I mean, if you have a detached garage to run water and sewer, you're probably looking at about at least 6,000.
More,
right. So on that point, my suggestion to clarify this would be, we were thinking flexibly with the sink if somebody was a gardener or a painter or a potter. I would say this, you're talking about a big ticket to bring water and potentially sewer out to the garage. So let somebody seek a variance for that, and then you have it on the record at a public hearing for a variance, if that's what they want to do. And they'll have lots of reasons to make cases on the basis perhaps of hardship and uniqueness, and they can make that case to the zoning board. The neighbors will know. And in that case, if anybody ever did do the Airbnb, there would have been a public record about it. There would have been a further condition in the approval. So I'd say take sink and move it as Steve is suggesting. And if you want to do gardening or potting in your garage, budget in a trip to the zoning board and do it with a little more light on it. And I've done zoning enforcement in addition to Jeff, so it's not a big deal to add that in.
From a Roger, if I could
think
ask
what you're
you-
saying though is you're taking it out. You're saying
Yeah.
under E, you would say, you would just say may have electrical service and take out a sink. That's what
Yeah.
I'm hearing as a
It does not
possible
contain
suggestion.
a sink, bathroom, toilet, so we're just moving sink.
And Roger, if I could ask a question about if that's where we seem to be headed, or if that's what others want to do as well, is that a trigger for having to redo the ordinance, to redo it again? Or is that there was a distinction between reintroducing the ordinance and a small change, and I don't know which one this is.
Well, first of all, your borough attorney is going to make that determination ultimately. I would tend to think that really the elimination of water is really what you're saying. It's really the elimination of water from the garage. It's sort of a close question, to be very honest with you, Matt. It's a situation where, does it change the dynamic of the use? To some degree, it does, as Jim has indicated. Could that then change, if it changes the dynamic of the use, does that then seem to indicate that it has to be reintroduced? It might not. I mean, I think it's a close call. And
However, I do want to just jump back for just a second before we go too far down the path of taking a sink out. Is that we're saying explicitly you can have a sink, but you cannot have a toilet. So what is the difference between saying it how we've said it, if we're saying we don't mind that there are sinks there, in terms of enforcement or whatever? You're saying it's a slippery slope, but the slippery slope is still people breaking the ordinance, going and putting in a toilet or shower, which we're saying specifically is not permitted. So
I think
you're saying by taking the sink out, it's like, oh, well, now you're going to know if someone's doing it. I still think if
there are going to be people who do what they want no matter what. I agree. They'll do it without permits. They'll just run the thing and no one will know if no one complains. But if you can have a sink as of right, then you can run those pipes as of right. You can go in and say, I'm going to do this, and you don't need to approach anybody to document what you're going to be doing there. And then it's very easy to slip into something else and say, well, I was allowed to do this. And I think,
but it says specifically what you're not allowed to do on top of after the sink, right? If you're worried that toilets and showers and everything is coming next, doesn't the ordinance say sink, but nothing? It does, Matt. But those things you're not allowed to do become a whole lot easier when you've got pipes running back there. You've dug the trench, you've dropped the sewer, you have all of the infrastructure ready to go, and everything else is going to be inside the building, and you'll never know. We'll never know. I mean, Scott doesn't know. He doesn't know what someone's doing inside the building.
No, but I gotta be honest with you. Our biggest source are the neighbors. Neighbors rat everybody out. That's just plain and simple.
Right.
That's how we find most of our violations.
And the primary intent is that that not to make this into the Airbnb, and I can guarantee you the neighbors are going to scream if that were to happen.
Right.
Right.
But rather than change the ordinance, maybe there's something that could be added or looked at in terms of the building department. Wise that, if the garage is going to have a sink, as has been suggested, that the maximum, as I guess Pedrick had talked about, the maximum diameter of the pipe will be whatever that is.
So just because the allowance of a sink is in the ordinance, that doesn't preclude you from having to still get a permit if you don't have a sink already. Like if you don't have a sink in the garage, you still have to get a permit for that sink.
Oh, you mean to run the pipes?
Yes. So, I mean,
Well, that's true.
the allowance of the sink doesn't mean you can on the sly go put in the sink. The allowance of the sink still means you still have to get a permit to put a sink in.
No, you're right. And the only thing that would be, and I may be making too much a deal of this. I just think it becomes easier once all that infrastructure is there. But maybe you're right. I mean, that's got to be permitted for the sink. And
I mean, I think what you're saying, Steve, is true to just to, in my own experience, seeing like how, right, is that you as you said, it's like you're getting the permit for the thing that people can see, right? You get the permit for when they're digging the trench and they're connecting to the sewer line that's in the house, and then everything else happens inside, and you got the permit for the sink, and then 2 years later, once you're inside that space, there's some waistline. I do therefore then, right, having the 1.5 inch waistline that is adequate for a sink, which is not adequate for a toilet, would be a way around, would be another way around that. But maybe that's like a more complicated way to address it in the code rather than just saying no sinks. I don't know.
Well, I mean, that would come up if they put in permits for it. We would require a riser diagram, size piping you're using. I mean, if we see a 4-inch line going out to a garage, I mean, it's not needed. So we would probably just deny that and make them scale the pipe size down.
Okay, so maybe just with I don't know, should we take a temp on this, leaving the, about the sink language? Because I feel like we're sort of, we've gone back and forth and I'm not really sure where we've landed. So maybe just a quick show of hands on leaving the language the way it is, which would allow for a sink. So if you are in favor of leaving the language as is for a sink, raise your hand.
I'm okay. The code official convinced me.
Okay, I think we have it. Okay, all right. Okay. You had, I don't remember if there was something else to be addressed in your.
I thought that there was a reference to home occupations, and I thought, is it necessary that it has to be for gain?
Well, it sounds like your reading of that has maybe some legal ease that is lost on someone like myself. I just read that to mean that it's that would enhance or anything that your home can do there as well. But you're saying that it says something other than that?
Well, it's talking about using the space instead of just.
There's activity carried out for gain by a resident. In other words,
right. So
it's a gain if I have a playroom for my kids. That's a gain for me, right? That's.
Yeah, I mean, and I may be playing lawyer now. Usually, when I hear activity for gain, I think of for compensation.
Right, but my kids never ever pay me for playing in the playroom, ever. This doesn't happen. I'm just saying within your own, I mean, all this is a use for your home, expand, your office, your whatever. Like,
I've asked too. I never get it.
I mean, Roger, is that is an activity carried out for gain? Isn't that a business?
It is, and that's what this is supposed to be regulating. That's the whole point.
So if I want to do pottery classes for free, that would be this?
Potentially.
But how is that for gain?
Well, I think that it's, you know, if it turns out you were doing what, maybe I missed what you said.
Yeah. So home occupation is defined as an activity carried out for gain, and then it gives all of these specific things. But suppose I don't do the activity for gain. I do it for no money, just because I like it.
All right, well, let's just suggest that is a, let us call it an unusual set of circumstances that I don't think is going to be something that is going to be coming to the zoning officer by way of complaint very often.
Okay.
So that's just my opinion. It
Okay.
is, after all, a section that deals with home occupation. Home occupation is exactly what it means. It's a business for gain. You're right. And if somebody, you know, wants to do something, you know, here, you know, I guess that's an interesting question, but I don't honestly think, Steve, with all due respect, that that's going to be happening very often.
I think somebody that's volunteering or doing something in that way, again, it's something that falls under accessory use because it's subordinate to and serves as an ancillary purpose to a principal use. So, because there's residents that do all sorts of things from volunteering standpoints. I know when my mother we had a Cub Scout den in the basement, and the only way I could join, my father had to become the Scout Master for the largest pack in Bergen County. We had a Boy Scout business going in our house for years, but it was not for money.
Okay.
I have one more last one of Kim's dumb questions. So on the, I guess it's the second page under B, permitted accessory uses. Why does it say fences, walls, and hedges? I guess I don't understand the purpose of what B, permitted accessory uses, and then it enumerates like the garage, the greenhouse, recreational facilities like that. I get. I don't understand why it says fences, walls, and hedges.
The only thing we added to this was home occupations because there was a little glitch in the code. So we just made it clear that a home occupation was a permitted accessory use. Further reinforcement to the fact that your whole house or the majority of the space in your house can't become the occupation. That's when you cross that line. So all we added there, so it's always said fences, walls, and hedges. We didn't touch the rest of the
Right. That's always been there.
So you're just saying that you're allowed to put things like that on your property. That's all.
That's what it says.
Been there as long as that's not new.
I know. I'm just. It just seemed like an odd thing in combination with the other things for some reason. I don't know why. Or like that it comes before home occupation. Whatever. There's just something odd about the list.
Yeah. We added home occupation at the very end after the existing 4 provisions.
Okay. Does anyone else have any
Is it
further?
It's understood that the home occupation use, that has to be consistent with noise and all of that stuff, right? I mean, that's a whole separate thing.
That's governed by other sections, other police powers that are in the other ordinances. Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
If it is winding down,
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that this is a public meeting. I don't see anybody, but I think before we go for any kind of a vote, we should make it clear, or Jen can make it clear that there are no public, or at least we open it up to the public, or however you want to handle it. That's all.
So I guess I could say something like, if you would like to, if you're from, so Jen, if people from the public were here, they would be here. And then we would say something like, if you'd like to speak, raise your hand. So
Correct.
I'll just say, if you're here, raise your hand. Seeing no one from the public, I will now close the public portion of the meeting.
And if the board is at a point where you feel as though you're ready to take a motion, the motion would be, if you agree that this ordinance is not inconsistent, with the master plan, that would be a motion.
We have to say not inconsistent instead of consistent. No, I'm curious.
Yeah, I am too. And I don't like the language anymore.
Okay, but that is, it's so interesting. Okay. That's the kind of thing I would naturally say, but anyway, and people would tell me I was wrong. So, okay, at this time then, being that we've had a full conversation about the ordinance about auxiliary use of garages for home occupation, if at this time I would accept a motion to determine that the ordinance is not inconsistent with our master plan. Rebecca, I know you're dying to make that motion.
Oh, sure. Yes, I'll
could
make the
see it in your
motion.
face.
I think this is a great thing that we're doing. So absolutely. So
Second.
Okay, moved by Rebecca. I'm sorry, who seconded that? By Pedrick. Okay, Jen, roll call, please.
Mr. Brescher,
Yes.
Ms. Hadhazy,
Are you on mute?
You're on mute.
Sorry.
Oh.
Yes.
Mr. Hale,
Yes.
Ms. Hand,
yes.
Mr. Kluger,
Yes.
Mr. Malay,
Yes.
Mr. Nolan,
Yes.
Mr. Pearlman,
He left.
I think we lost him. I don't know when, sorry.
8:52.
Oh, good girl.
Mr. Williams,
Yes.
Ms. Hammond.
Yes. All right, well, I thank everyone for a robust conversation about our garage ordinance. See, Roger, I should have taken that bet because
Clearly,
you're,
but I would have lost miserably.
you would have lost big, and I knew going in. I was like, oh, poor Roger, he's just, you're
So
just,
nice.
Thank you, everybody.
you're so naive. Yeah.
Kim,
Yes. So
can we have one quick question for Jim?
Sure.
Is the JSM submission application has been deemed complete, or is it they're going to do some more work on it?
We have not deemed it complete. I think at this point, now that we have the environmental commission's review in and the fire official, we're going to do Bruce and our office are going to do a kind of quick scrub through and identify any issues that might be subject to waivers or variances and things of that nature, and then try to get a pre-application meeting with them.
Okay.
Because it looks like
Discuss
fire
concern.
and safety brought up lots of issues, so.
Right, and I don't want to get into the issues now because we're not hearing it. So we're going to try to do that meeting, and we'll probably have Roger part of that as well, and we'll make a determination as we get closer to that on when we declare completeness, if we do, or if there's some missing items and it's incomplete. But what we want to do most of all is communicate some of those review comments that you're referring to, Kim, to the applicant. So we're going to see if we can figure out maybe even a socially distanced face-to-face meeting. Sometimes it's better to deliver those messages.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
And as far as we know, we, I guess, are waiting to declare completeness and do our review, but the girls' school on Cleveland Avenue is intending to be before you all next month with a fairly compliant application with regard to the redevelopment plan.
On a
Fairly
technical-
compliant.
On a technical issue, how will we'll get PDFs of the plans ahead of time, like that were under review for, let's say, the school or JSM, and is that, how would there be, let's say, something at the,
Yes.
the borough that we could maybe read only, or what would be I'm just curious.
We just get package deliveries like we have in the past. They just show up at our door.
Yeah.
Well,
Bruce,
Amazon does it. What the?
yeah. Bruce, how far away do you think we are from completeness on that?
On JSM or
The
on
girls' school,
the
the girls'
school? I haven't looked at it, but I could do that in short order. That one is not a problem.
We could do, yeah. They've asked us to basically do, or we've had discussions with the applicant because the redevelopment plan was, we say, intensely worked and the plan was reworked as we were working the redevelopment plan. So I think the intent is to declare completeness and provide the professional reviews kind of all in one fell swoop, but they're intending to get here in November.
One other quick question. Consistency review. We've already spent whatever it's been, an hour and a half on that together with the review. Maybe it would be more economical, since this is not going to an escrow from a developer, that either me or Jen, I'll be happy to draft a letter to the town council indicating that it has been deemed to be not inconsistent, rather than spending the time and your money doing a resolution, if that's acceptable to you.
So,
I mean, I'm happy to do the
you
rest.
mean redoing the resolution that we just sort of saw?
No. In other words, just like any other application, you need something to memorialize it. Normally,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I'm suggesting, rather than doing a formal resolution, which you'll spend more money of the tax. There's no application here. Maybe the simpler way to do it is me to send a letter to the town council through the attorney, and with a copy to the town attorney, indicating that you have made a determination tonight that the application is not inconsistent with the master plan in accordance with section 26.
And then the only resolution would be any of their resolutions. Their ordinance pass.
In other words, they would be in a position to move forward, knowing that you've acted upon it. And you go to
Right. So is that a typical thing that you do? I mean, my only curiosity is, like, at some point when you're looking back at the record, is it clear that that the planning board made the recommendation, if it's just you?
It would be
communicating that
as part of the planning board record. In other words, I would send it to the town council, and then a copy to the town attorney or the borough attorney, as well as a copy to Jen. So she'd have
Yeah, I mean, I have no opinion. We take your advice on this. So whatever. I mean, I would my stance on it would be to defer to your judgment on that, Roger.
All right, then I'll do the letter if nobody seems to object. All right.
Yeah, I thought I saw somewhere that they were planning on having second reading next Tuesday. I thought, unless I misread it somewhere, but
It did say,
October
I think it
20th.
said that in the letter to us, was that it was on their calendar for their next meeting, yeah.
Right, that was the hope, so
I'll get the letter out tomorrow.
thank you.
Okay, so the only other pieces of business that we usually kind of try to check in on are other reports would be from the Rehabilitation Screening Committee, which has not met since we all last met. And that also, we usually give Scott an opportunity to just update us if there's any sort of thing that we need to know on the zoning and building side of things.
Nothing
Scott,
new at all.
Nothing new.
No,
All
it's
right.
been very, very quiet the past month.
Okay, does anyone else have any other concerns or that they wanted to address the board? All right, seeing none, again, I thank you all for your time and robust conversation on our ordinance this evening, and I would accept a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Second.
Alan, do we have a second? Seconded by Pedrick. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No? Okay. All right. All right.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.